Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. We've got a very special show for you today. Around 2 hours of scary, allegedly true Dogman stories. That's 8 different stories, some with multiple Dogman encounters. And it all begins right now. Dogman, new canine species or living nightmare? Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm writing to you about my experiences with the Dogman because I heard you say that you used to be a student and friend of the late John A. Keel. A lot of my interest in the subjects of cryptozoology and Forteanism came from reading Keel's books when I was in high school and college. I don't know if he ever wrote about the Dogman. I don't think it really fully came into fashion until after his passing. I wondered how Keel would approach the Dogman if he were still alive and young enough to investigate the subject. When a neighbor of mine claimed to have seen a Dogman, I decided to interview her and begin to collect and compile my own database of information on the subject of that creature. Let's just call this a lady Mrs. Neighbors, since she doesn't want her real name used. Mrs. Neighbors was driving on Route 206 over by the Walhanling Cemetery when she claimed she heard a loud howl outside, louder than her car radio. Turning the volume down, she listened again for a while, but heard nothing. And then, in the next second, she claimed that a hairy beast man leaped out of the woods and literally ran across the hood of her car while she was driving around 50 miles an hour. It had run out bipedally, but scrambled over her car using whatever means necessary. Mrs. Neighbors would get emotional when talking about the incident, saying that she didn't feel safe driving anywhere alone any longer. Her description of the beast was not really very different from the kind of Dogman that you tend to show on your thumbnails. Mrs. Neighbors led me to a nice young woman we'll call Katie, who said she was in an old unused barn on her family's property, looking around inside about the possibility of remodeling the building for her own personal use. She said it was dark inside, but just enough light was flooding in that she could see what she needed to see. Suddenly, the light seemed to be increasing, and a squeaking sound told her that the door to the barn must be opening. Turning around, expecting to see someone from her family coming through the door, she was stunned to instead see a man taller than her father, covered in either animal pelts or possibly his own real fur. She told me his face did not look normal, and she referred to it as a Dogman, even though she did not know that was a term used by others. She thought that was just her own personal name for the beast, but she's become well aware of the Dogman since then. So, one Dogman experiencer led to another, which led to yet another still. I was going pretty good for a while, and there seemed to have been a rash of Dogman appearances in one short period in the area all around me. Then I stopped hearing about new sightings at the same time that I started a new day job, and I kind of fell out of the practice of being an investigator. It was actually years later when I finally had my own sighting, which did not come when I was out looking for the Dogman. It was a real surprise encounter, and if I had not spent that earlier time studying and investigating this subject, I'd probably have classified this as a supernatural experience. I can fully understand why some people might come away convinced that what they came in contact with was not a normal kind of an animal. I get why people resort to paranormal and supernatural, or else psychological or psychic or mythical explanations for the beast. I have never been a believer in anything superstitious or magical, yet I now am open to the idea of something like that possibly being real, at least in some sense. I don't believe that the words we use to describe this oddness are accurate or properly descriptive at all. This leads to problems in semantics, difficulties in explaining or translating things that we see. So if asked, do I think that Dogman is supernatural or paranormal? I would technically have to answer no, because I don't find those two words to be accurately descriptive of the real-life phenomenon of the Dogman. However, I do think that those who call Dogman supernatural or paranormal are attempting to describe something real, which has not yet been formally defined about this creature or entity or being or whatever it is. People aren't using those terms randomly and for no reason. They're trying to describe something about the Dogman that the mainstream form of our English language really does not have accurate descriptors for. At least, not that I'm aware of. So what happened to me was that I was driving north on Ohio Route 60 when I saw a man-shaped dog burst out onto the road from my left. I had woods on both sides of me, and for some reason, I thought that I was about to be swarmed with many more such creatures. I'm not sure where that idea came from, but I skidded the car to a halt, and I looked all around to see where the rest of them were going to jump out at me from. So this one Dogman turned out to be more than enough to mess my day up pretty badly. For some reason, he just didn't like the way I stopped my car or something, and he marched right over and banged both fists on my hood. This was like a Bigfoot fist. It was not a dog paw. It looked like his humanoid arms and hands were covered in dog fur. Pretty much all the rest of him actually did look like a wolf though, or at least some kind of a dog. Its coloring was not the dark gray that most people have told me about and that you usually depict on your channel. It was more of a tan color, like khakis. Imagine a cougar's fur, but paler, and also longer, more shaggy. Its ears were tall, but flopped over on the ends when he threw himself into emotional action. When I didn't stop the beast from banging on my front hood, he walked over and punched the side of his fist down onto my windshield, opening the spider web crack all over it. I put the car in reverse, and I backed up, because with another hit or two, that Dogman might have showered my face with glass, and for some reason, I wanted to avoid that. I should admit at this point that I was quite afraid of what was happening, to the point where my hands were shaking, and I'm pretty sure if I'd have tried to get out of the car, my knees would have probably given out on me. Was it unnatural or supernatural fear, though? I don't really know. The creature seemed to have almost unlimited power in its arms, and they weren't as frightening as the prehistoric-looking dog head and dog fangs. It's too hard for me to really know if any paranormal factor was involved in that intense fear that I did feel, but I don't think I've ever been that scared before or ever since. Once I'd backed off a ways from the Dogman, I thought about making a U-turn and just cutting my losses. But then I looked at my broken windshield and I thought about how much it was going to cost to replace it. Then I got mad. I lost my temper at that Dogman. I remembered a special pitch I used to throw when playing in Little League. I could get it to move to my left as it approached the plate. I'd aim it at the guy's head, and I'd look him in the eye as I threw. I knew it would curve left into the strike zone, but he thought I was throwing at his head. So he'd take a step back, and I would get an easy strike call. I decided I would throw that pitch at the Dogman. What I mean to say is, I drove right at the beast, looking it right in the eye, and accelerating as I approached. I was challenging the beast to a game of chicken. I wanted him to give up and run away. I wanted to make him blink before I did. And so, I drove directly at the Dogman, and I saw him hesitate. He had this dog expression on his dog face, like he was trying to calculate whether me ramming him at 60 miles an hour would hurt him a lot or a whole lot. He must have decided that it would be unpleasant, because he dove out of my way and ran to my right into the forest and out of my life. That forest, by the way, is the Woodbury Wildlife Area, which stretches on for miles and miles and miles, and logically must be one of the homes of that creature. In the end, I have to say that my initial conundrum turned out not to be an issue at all. It's just not a question of whether Dogman is an unidentified canine species, or if Dogman is a living nightmare and a pure archetype of fear. And the reason why is because I no longer see any reason that Dogman can't be both at the same time. Dogman can kill through fear merely by being present in a location, so you cannot deny his almost supernatural control of the nervous systems of many of those creatures right around him. The very idea of his presence can cause some animals and people to shut down and faint. If that isn't an archetype of fear, then I don't know what is. But do God forms and archetypal conceptual beings leave footprints? Because I've seen footprints left in the mud by the Dogman in the woods behind my own property. Since they seem to physically exist, and they leave evidence of their passing, yet they are not officially recognized by science, that would seem to indicate that they are an undiscovered canine species, or at least a species exhibiting a very close parallel evolution to canines. So I guess I should change the title of this to Dogman, the new canine species, is a living nightmare. We'd like to thank dear MPW. You always do more than we could ever ask of you. You donated using our super thanks. Now we're a grateful Bigfoot and a grateful Hank. Please join us in thanking MPW, who made that previous story possible. You can be as fine and celebrated a human as MPW by donating to us in any number of ways, some of which have different perks or gifts back to you than others. Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of the show, after our final story of the day, to explain all the cool things you can get. But we've got 7 more Dogman stories to go before we get there. So let's continue the celebration of devastation with our next Dogman story, which is known as the Crowley Lake Creature. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Have you ever been to Crowley Lake? Have you ever been to Lake Crowley? Both are located in California, and one is inside the other. Sometimes when I'm tired or just getting up, I say them backwards, but Crowley Lake is the name of the place, and Lake Crowley is the name of the actual reservoir of water inside the place. I was visiting this location with my first girlfriend, Crystal, some years back, and the two of us discovered a Dogman hiding inside those naturally formed columns they have over there that look so man-made. It was a humanoid, upright Dogman, and it was only a little bit taller than I was. I'm 6'3", so I'd estimate him at 6'4", or 5 or 6. Of course, his ears were up on top of his dog head, so maybe that made him seem a bit taller. He wasn't 10 feet tall or anything crazy like that, though. This was basically a somewhat tall man, but with no civilization or clothing. He was covered in fur completely, like a dog or a bear, but he stood on his hind legs, and his body resembled a human more than it resembled a dog's or even an ape's. The hind legs, or I should just say the legs, were similar to a dog's or cat's hind legs, but they were adapted to walking upright. The pads it stood on were proportionally much larger, as they had to carry the weight of the entire creature, and the muscles on those legs were also proportioned up as well. The front legs were more like arms, although not entirely. They did end in these hand-like paws that I can't really say were hands exactly. Maybe I should call them claws, as they ended in long hard nails. Imagine a mix between a raccoon paw and an eagle's claw. Then size that up. So in other words, I've got a lake monster story where we never saw the monster go in the lake. It's a land monster living near this lake, or that at least was migrating through there on that day. To be honest, there's no way a Dogman could have been squatting in the columns under the island there because it was too popular a location even back then. I'm only writing to you about it now because I saw a photo display about it on my Microsoft browser, and it brought back so many memories. Maybe you guys saw the same thing I did. Well, this is my personal Dogman story from that location. For those of you who have never heard of this place before, Crowley Lake was named after the Desert Padre, aka Father John J. Crowley. Father Crowley was active during the California water wars of the 20th century. His goal was to get water to the people who were having their supplies siphoned off by the bigwigs in Los Angeles. At any rate, he passed in 1940 and I never met him, so the late great father has nothing to do with this story, other than the fact he lent his name to this water reservoir. Okay, so although I was a newbie, Crystal had been to Lake Crowley a few times before, and always found it fascinating. She'd been there with a group of people and a tour guide, the first time she went there with her crazy father. After that, the two of them figured out how to get back to that spot on the lake on their own, when nobody else was around. Their favorite time to go was dawn, and I was honored when she invited me to do the same with her. Crystal insisted these columns were not man-made, and she told me this convoluted story about how these very strange-looking columns and pillars were created on the eastern shore of the lake. I recently looked it up on Wikipedia, and their explanation was just as strange as hers had been years back. There are columns built up that look like they were done by the Romans, if the Romans had been tripping on a powerful hallucinogen at the time. The thing is, they're much older than the Roman Empire. You see, this area had been completely submerged underwater until the reservoir was finished in 1941. At that point, these formerly underwater columns and caves and rooms and hallways were first exposed for humans to investigate. Science assures us that these were formed by nature, but they sure do seem like dream versions of human structures. In some areas, little alcoves are formed. In other areas, rooms. Then there are these sort of ballrooms filled with columns that you can walk around inside of. It all seems as though intelligence were behind it, even if it were a warped or alien kind of intelligence. Wikipedia says that there was a catastrophic volcanic explosion over 760,000 years ago, which first formed the land on the coast. Over the eons, cold water seeped down into the still hot volcanic ash under the ground, and the resulting steam somehow formed cavities down there. And also somehow the steam formed these columns that sure do look as though they were similarly sized man-carved stones placed intelligently on top of one another. I don't understand how steam could accomplish that, but if that's what mainstream science says, then whatever. Maybe it's true, I don't know. What I do know is that Crystal and I came across the Dogman that we saw inside that labyrinth of underground columns. In photos, it's hard to grasp how much is going on in that place. There are almost 5,000 columns spread over 4,000 acres. You could spend your life there investigating it. You really could. Crystal told me the mainstream version of what these columns in this place is before we arrived. But once we got there, she wanted to tell me this legendary version that her father told her little brother and her mom when he brought them there years back. Actually, he and Crystal wrote the story together. So she started weaving this tale of a very ancient people who lived in that area 750,000 years or more into the deep past. She told me that they lived before television, before machines, before the knowledge of electricity or even fire, and long before the invention of clothing. These people would have been equally animal, but they sussed out on their own how to build this very ancient place. Since these creatures did not think like we do, we can't understand why they made these odd rooms and hallways, or what their original purpose was 1,000,000 years back. We can only take it in and appreciate the genius of these ancient earthlings. I was grooving on her narration, which was really fitting the location like a glove. I was literally getting chills with the stuff she was saying, even though consciously I knew it was just a gag made up by her father. The thing is, his joke version seemed somehow more realistic than the mainstream opinion on the subject. When I was walking in that very strange place, she could have told me that aliens built it, or ants, and I probably would have believed any of it. The location is so very different than any other place I'd ever been to, that it really was like being on another planet, or in an alternate reality. But the thing is, when she got into talking about the kind of ancient man who might have built this system of columns and cavities, we were walking into one of the deeper and darker areas in the entire structure. And then we heard a little sound. It reminded me of a canine sound, like something a dog might emit if it were frightened or stressed. Crystal and I both shut up and looked at each other. Slowly and cautiously, we sidled down a bit to our left, and then we saw it. Something that looked like it belonged in a Greek myth rose up and barked at us, I guess you might say. It was growling and whining and barking one after the other, and its eyes were so dilated that they looked like they were electrically lit up from inside. Yes, it was a dog of some kind. At least it looked that way on top. But that canine head was on top of broad shoulders that looked more like a mini He-Man covered in fur than they looked like any part of a canine. It had fangs as long as a switchblade, and as I think I stated earlier, it was a little bit taller than I was. I wanted to run, but was surprised when Crystal took a step toward the beast man. She was asking it if it was hurt or hungry, as though it were going to understand English. The creature flipped out, barking and growling right in her face. Crystal withdrew, crying, and I screamed and charged at the beast. The thing ran off through a path, through the columns, that I wouldn't have even seen in the darkness and gloom inside there. I just lost my temper when I saw that he made Crystal cry. I was young, and my emotions were strong. She was fine, but neither of us ever went back to that part of California. At least as far as I know. I certainly never went back. I mean, I know that there's basically no chance I'd ever see another Dogman in that place, even if I went to live there and camped out between the columns every night. I know full well that this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but it still freaks me out. It's always going to freak me out, too. I mean, what if the two of us sort of conjured that Dogman up? What if talking about the Earth 1,000,000 years ago brought some prehistoric creature back to life, even if only for a little while? What if it was a tulpa purely formed out of our imagination and having nothing to do with the prehistory of the planet? Or what if what we saw was a plain old North American upright walking canid, or a Dogman? And what if that is the most illogical explanation for the Crowley Lake monster? So many people will be spending this winter sitting alone in the cold, trying to piece their lives back together. But not you. You can be spending the winter piecing Dogman back together with this fantastic new Dogman Prison Breakout Jigsaw Puzzle. 500 little confusing, frustrating pieces of cardboard fun. It's the Dogman Prison Breakout Jigsaw Puzzle, and it could be making its way to you via special delivery if you click on the link available somewhere in the description. We got a donation from Sonny Montigny. We thought that was as cool as your figny. I won't even try to be funny. This episode was brought to you by Sonny. Please join me in thanking Sonny Montigny for donating to us using our handy dandy thanks button located under each and every one of our YouTube videos. We'll get that money next month and enjoy it, but if you'd like to get us cash faster, another option is to donate directly to us using our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page, which is linked to in the description. The Paw Paw Problem. Dear Scary Stories NYC, some of my friends, family, and I have a theory that Paw Paw, Michigan was named after a Dogman incident. Not any particular or specific Dogman incident that we're aware of, but one presumed lost to history. Local tradition disagrees with us, as the conventional story is that the town was named after the Paw Paw River, and the Paw Paw River was in turn named after the Paw Paw trees and the Paw Paw fruit in those trees. I believe I read on a local official governmental website that the word Paw Paw was a native term, but this is untrue. It was a Spanish corruption of the word papaya, which is a fruit that the Europeans had encountered in South America before they got as far north as Michigan. So you might say that the Paw Paw was, at least in those days, sort of the North American version of the papaya fruit. But the natives didn't call it Paw Paw. They called it Asamine or Racemine, which is where the scientific name for it was derived. The reason that a small group of us think the name of the location has to have originated somehow from the Dogman is that we ourselves have seen the Dogman, either in Paw Paw or else in the general area around it. When we think of Paw Paw, we don't visualize fruit. We visualize the double-sized dog paws that some of us claim to have seen on that canine creature. I'm going to tell you 4 or 5 of our real-life sightings and experiences with both upright and quadrupedal canines of extraordinary size in the Paw Paw area, and then I'm going to let you decide for yourself what you think about it. So before we get back to my Dogman ideas, we should take a very brief side trip into explaining what a Paw Paw fruit even is. If you live in Indiana or Kentucky, you can probably tell this a lot better than I ever could. Feel free to correct me in the comments if I get anything wrong. Now, the Paw Paw was once a fairly common staple of the diets of people on the East Coast and in the Midwest before the arrival of Europeans. But now in 2022, it's a rare and exotic treat. The Paw Paw is a fruit and tree that foragers do go out and look for, but it isn't generally farmed, and it's going to be extremely rare to see them in a store. This is mainly because the fruits stay ripe for such a short period. They were once cultivated all over the eastern and central United States by the native peoples who would forage for fruits and vegetables when they were in season. This worked well for their culture, but the Paw Paw never translated into modern life in the U.S. For one thing, it takes 7 years before the tree even starts producing any fruit. Then the fruit itself is only edible for such a short period of time that it's hard to transport them or store them. Many people who get their hands on some ripe Paw Paws will make homemade Paw Paw ice cream or jams or jellies, of which there are a large number of recipes for on the internet. The fruit is also supposed to be quite delicious when eaten raw, but I have never had that privilege, so I can't tell you for sure. I'd bet you $1 that the Dogman in this region have all tasted the Paw Paw fruit, though. I bet they've tasted a lot of things that we never will. I wouldn't be surprised to find the fruit itself being named after the Dogman, since I believe that these canines are omnivores and scavengers, not merely carnivores. I think they eat some plants and roots in addition to roadkill and whatever prey they can manage to bring down. I bet the Dogman are in Michigan when the Paw Paw is ripening. Maybe they go to Canada or Wisconsin afterward, but I know they're here when the Paw Paw is in season. This first story is from my own father, who said this happened to him in 1964 in the autumn. This was when my mother was expecting me, actually, so Dad was taking on extra jobs and saving money to take care of me once I made my grand entrance. I think he was out working as a cab driver off the books when this happened. It was sort of like Uber, but probably not legal back then. It's also possible he was driving home from one of his gigs, though I don't really know. For whatever reason, Dad was driving on 41st Street along the edge of 3 Mile Lake through a nice suburban neighborhood on that outcropping of land over there. Suddenly, through the bushes that lead to the water, crashed a huge dog, walking upright, dripping wet. Dad said it was clearly a canine and not a bear, and that it turned to face him, fully lit up by the car's headlights. Dad said he slammed on the brakes, and the thing just sort of barked at him for a while. Dad compared the Dogman to his old sergeant in the army. He said it sounded like he was barking out orders to him, and the thing sounded pretty angry about something. Dad told me he just sort of sat there in the car waiting for the upright beast to get it all out of his system. Eventually, the beast man marched across 41st Street and straight into someone's backyard. Then, he just sort of kept walking in the direction of the other shoreline or beach area on the other side. The last couple of times Dad told the story to me or the family about what he'd experienced, he made a point of stressing that what he saw was not the same as many modern Dogman reports. He did not witness broad shoulders. He did not see hand-like clawed paws. This was a dog, a really big canine or wolf, and it walked upright on its hind legs. Its arms were not held back to the sides the way humans do. They either hung in front or they were raised up in front in a defensive posture, but the paws at the ends of the arms were dog paws. This was a sighting of an upright walking canine, but it was not the modern werewolf-style sighting that you usually run on this channel. The next sighting I'm going to tell you about took place in Sunset Park, and it did feature a werewolf like Dogman this time. This happened to my cousin we'll call Cousin Ernie. It was sometime in the late 70s through the early 80s, and I know this because Ernie was married in June of 1984, and he's still married today to that same woman. The young lady in this story, though, she was one of the girlfriends that Ernie dated before settling down. He wrote it all up in an email to me, so this next part is my cousin Ernie telling us his story in his own words. Take it away, Ernie. During the period before we got married, when my eventual wife dumped me, I dated some pretty wild women. I had fling after fling, and at the time, I thought I was incredibly happy. Of course, my loving wife has since explained to me that I was actually miserable and sad while I was having all that amazing fun. Luckily, she rescued me from those adventures and those satisfying days, and now we're married, locked together at the hip, until we are finally freed by clinical death. When this story took place, I was not so lucky. Back then, I was dating a wild girl who thought out of the box. She wore white out of season. She went in the outdoor. When she suggested we go to Sunset Park to watch the sun rise, I was excited to go. We were kind of noodling and canoodling by ourselves in the darkness there waiting for the sun to change the colors of the sky. After the sun finally came up, it was hard not to notice how easy we were to see from the road. There are very few trees in that park, and we felt kinda exposed there. That was why we walked toward the wooded area across the street to the north. We were thinking of going inside those woods and sorta, getting romantic, as this was a new relationship, and we still couldn't get enough of each other, if you know what I mean. Even before we crossed the street, though, we could see that the underbrush in those woods was so thick, it would be impenetrable. In fact, I literally said something to that effect like, "There's no creature larger than a squirrel who could get through there." And just to show you how smart I am, this big, grizzly bear-sized ape man with a dog head came crunch, crunch, crunch right out of those woods. He stood on the grass on the corner over there and looked around until he spotted me and my girl. I remember him blinking a few times at us, and he really did look like some sort of magical wolfman. His eyes lit up like something from a horror movie, but that was otherwise basically a wolf head. Why the wolf head was on top of that hairy caveman-looking body, I really don't know. He looked like something out of a Joe Dante horror movie. In a number of ways, he really did seem like a movie werewolf, except that a guy in a costume with animatronics could never have run through that thick, jungly woods as fast as this guy did. Okay, so where was I? Oh, right. Staring at this werewolf from a horror movie, standing there on the corner naked. He was a big guy, but not like 8 feet or anything. Size-wise, he could have been a man in a costume, but the legs looked all wrong to me, and my girl as well. We both talked later about how the legs were not shaped like a human's legs. They seemed stronger than a human's legs, too. This creature seemed incredibly strong, in fact, and I didn't know what I was gonna do if he took a step in our direction. There was no way we could outrun him, and there was no way we could win a fight against him either. Fortunately for us both, the beast turned around and walked quickly back into those woods, leaping and sliding through those bushes like they almost weren't even there. Even as I saw him doing it, I couldn't understand what my eyes were seeing. It was not magic, but it was happening so fast it might as well have been magic. If this creature were compared to the finest human athlete, it would be like comparing that athlete to a toddler, relatively speaking. Humanity's only defense against something like this Dogman would be technology or weaponry, and I had neither of them on me at that moment. But the werewolf man just left us alone, and so I lived to tell this story that my wife hates to hear me tell. The end. Thanks, cousin. A former girlfriend of mine that I remained friends with once had a Dogman encounter on Maple Island. This was not an upright walking canine, nor was it a werewolf type either. This was a remarkably large dog that walked on all fours through most of the encounter. Here's an excerpt from the email that Jenny sent me about it, which she has given me permission to use. Quote, "I went picnicking on Maple Island in Michigan, and I saw a Dogman. I'm writing to you because Maple Island is near Paw Paw, and I remember your crazy theory about the Dogman creating the Paw Paw tree, or whatever it is that you go on about. This was a Dogman just like in that old movie they showed on Monster Quest that turned out to be a hoax. But this was in real life. It wasn't a Super 8 film. I had just broken up with my husband, and so I was hanging with my family, but I found that I didn't feel very much as though I belonged at first. I left the others to their picnic, and I walked to the shore, noticing consciously all the seaweed-type plants growing in the water along the shoreline. It was a somewhat steep drop over there, too. Looked like you'd get tangled up in the weeds and strangle yourself by accident. The thought of that made my family seem suddenly more friendly, and so I retreated to go remember how to get along with them. Now, the reason I mention all that was because about 50 minutes or an hour later, we all heard a big kerplunk kind of a splash. And then, we all saw something climbing out of the water over there, in the exact spot I had noticed the seaweed and water plants growing. Rather than getting caught up in the plant life, this large beast appeared to be walking resolutely ahead, pulling anything out by the roots that dared to try to slow his passage. When he got to the shoreline and shook himself dry, we could all see that he was a four-legged dog, 5 foot high, at the shoulder. He was long-haired, like the Dogman in the Gable film hoax, except this creature was too large to have been a human, and this thing seemed to have real fur. It was not wearing a ghillie suit. By this point, we were all standing up around the picnic table, staring at this bear-sized dog down by the water. I know I was not exactly afraid yet, but I was alarmed. It looked like a dog, and quite often large dogs are very friendly to me. So I wasn't afraid of him because of his size, but I sure was hoping that he would either turn out to be friendly, or that he'd just go off on his own and ignore us. This bear dog, he chose a third path. He decided to start barking at us like a car alarm or something. He looked like this was his master's backyard, and my family were all burglars. When he yipped and yapped, he briefly stood up on his hind legs. This thing was so huge, it looked like he could block out our sun from all the way over there. We all gasped in awe when it stood up, and there was this moment when all time froze still. Then that big canine hit the ground running on all fours, making strides toward us before we could even grab our stuff and start running away. We got chased back to the parking area, where we could no longer see the beast behind us, nor feel the ground shake and rumble under his thundering steps. What kind of a wolf grows to be that tall? It was gray, but I can't really tell you very much else about the massive creature. I've got one more Dogman story for you with 2 sightings in it, and this happened to me personally. In fact, it happened when I was dating that smart girl, remember her? She didn't want to go to the zoo. She wanted to go to the Portman Nature Preserve. The fun started before we even officially arrived. As we were about to pull into the parking area of the main building of the Nature Preserve, we saw a bear-sized dog running upright, off the grounds, and across the street into a wooded area to our right. We were both like, huh? And then I made the left and finished pulling into the parking lot, only to discover no hubbub of any sort. Nobody was chasing the 2-legged Dogman. Nothing seemed to be disturbed at all. We asked someone who worked there about the creature, and we got frowned at. We asked someone else, and got glared at, as though we told an unfunny joke. Shrugging our shoulders, we went wandering on the land. It's basically dirt paths through the middle of nowhere, and occasionally there are some wooden signs. The signs often repeat information you should have already known before you got there, so maybe the signs are for space aliens helicoptering in. At any rate, we were stopped at one of these, looking to make sure that we knew where we were, and where the closest porta potty was and so forth. Suddenly, crash! This big dude trips backward through some bushes and tree branches and lands butt first on the dirt path, down maybe 40 or 50 feet in the direction we were about to walk in. I'm looking, and I swear, it looked like he was wearing a skin-tight fur costume, like an all-over cat suit in a dark gray set of colors. Then this other really big guy whose furry cat suit was closer to black came flying out of those same woods, only this guy was facing in a direction where I could see his features. Except he didn't have a face in the sense that I had expected him to have. I mean, there was no humanity to it. It was a lot closer to looking like a dog than anything else, and yet neither of these men were canine looking to me, From the neck down, the two of them wrestled and growled and snapped at each other with their formidable fangs and claws, and soon I saw them standing off against each other in profile, and I realized their hind legs very much resembled dogs or wolves, as well as their heads. At least one of them had a tail. It's just that their torsos and arms were so humanoid. These couldn't have been men in costumes, though it would have been more likely that we were seeing dogs disguised as men. The shapes of the legs were entirely anatomically different from human legs, and these were living creatures. They were not costumed people. The lighter one scored a hit on his darker pursuer. That one in turn tripped backward to our right into some trees. Then, the gray one made a hasty escape into the woods to our left. The dark black Dogman, standing 6'8" if he stood an inch, glared at us and roared, an almost feline-sounding warning. He burst into the woods to our left after his apparent mortal enemy. My girl and I just sort of stood there for a while, and then I was like, "Do you want to keep going forward?" And she was like, "No, I'm good." And just like that, we were off to Arby's for some comfort food. So, do my family really think that Paw Paw was named after Dogman? Probably not. It's just sort of a way to try to draw people's attention to the fact that a bunch of us are convinced that we really saw this thing, or one of these things. In my case, I saw it too. So if we can't convince you that Paw Paw was named after the Dogman, maybe we should name our local Dogman here Paw Paw, after the town. I think that might solve the Paw Paw problem. We got a big donation from our EPCS. This is a lady who is truly blessed. We're gonna do another poem tomorrow for her. Now here comes Henry Lee as fast as a blur. Hank? Thanks, Biggie. I'll be along at the very end of this 2-hour special to fill in the deets on how you can become a Scary Stories executive producer, as well as getting free and advanced preview episodes. But in the meantime, we've got a bunch more Dogman stories for you tonight, including this next one that we like to call We Are Haunted by a Paranormal Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, some of my family are convinced that we are no longer haunted by a very strange, upright walking canine who is either paranormal or else a hallucination, illusion, or projection of some kind. None of us have seen the beast for 5 years, and the most recent sighting before that was 7 years earlier. The later 1970s through the mid-1990s was the heyday of our supernatural Dogman. I'm not officially allowed to tell you where our house is. I could get cut out of the will. I'm the only one in the family who would love to go public about the creature or apparition or whatever it is. The rest are all the type to keep a low profile and stick to the shadows with their trust funds. They don't want to become known as an eccentric werewolf-chasing Addams family. I, on the other hand, would be a lot less bored if I could write a book and do paranormal conventions and podcasts. I mean, I'm really into this sort of thing, but I'm the only one in my entire clan. So now let me tell you all the Dogman sightings and experience stories that have happened to my family, using pseudonyms where needed to protect everyone's identity. These are some of the sightings I know about, at least, the ones I can remember off the top of my head. Back in the early 1960s, just before I was born, my father saw a giant dog run past his car as he was pulling into the family driveway. He said that dog was so tall, and his head was so high, that he couldn't even see it as it galloped suddenly past. I'm including that sighting, even though the canine in it was down on all fours and not upright. And also, even though there was nothing overly or apparently paranormal or supernatural about that incident. That doesn't mean it was a natural event. but it did seem as though the car pulling into the driveway had spooked the dog into running off the property. Let's fast forward to 1977 or 78. I was practicing kung fu in the back of the house, which I had been learning from a sensei that my mother was paying to teach me. My self-confidence was boosted by this, and I was feeling more in control of my life. And then, through the trees behind our property, there walked a man so large that I lost my balance in the middle of a practice kick, and I hit the ground backward hard. I remember sitting on my butt, looking over at the tallest man I'd ever seen. And as my eyes were able to take in more detail, I started to feel a different kind of unhappy than I'd ever felt before. I remember worrying and being sad, while also feeling more surprised than I'd ever felt before either. If you land on chance or community chest, and then pull a go-to-jail card, that's still a lot better than pulling a giant cryptid man walking towards you one evening card. The man-thing was walking directly in line with the setting sun. As I sat there, numb, I could make out his shaggy form. I could see he was limping on one of his legs, which looked like animal legs, not human ones. His head had tall ears up on top. Not as tall as a rabbit, but tall. Its two eyes glowed a bright blue in the middle of his pitch-black face. People sometimes check me on the eye color, but I'm telling you, they were a sort of icy blue color, and they were blindingly bright in the middle of the completely dark face. I was not sure what I was looking at, and honestly, I still don't really know. I mean, it's the family Dogman or Wolfman. I'll tell you another couple stories before I'm done. We all know what this is, but nobody knows what this is. When I saw the Dogman I saw, I thought it was lights out for me. I thought it was a giant predatory animal, and it was going to rip me up and eat me like so much pita bread. As strange as it looked, walking upright, standing 8 or 9 feet tall, eyes glowing like blue flashlights, I never questioned that this was a meat-eating beast, same as a bear or a mountain lion. But when this huge bipedal canine took a step toward me sitting on my butt there on the dirt, all of a sudden, I couldn't make out where he'd gone anymore. It wasn't exactly like he faded or blinked out. It was more like he stepped behind something, so that I suddenly couldn't see him any longer. The thing is, there was nothing between me and him, except air. Nothing my eyes could see, at least. What's scarier than an 8 or 9 foot tall dog-headed beast man, backlit by the setting sun? Well, not knowing where that beast man went, and wondering if he's become invisible. That gave me the shivers like I've never gotten before, and I got up, and I ran inside. In the 1980s, there were a lot of little sightings, but mostly just brief, and from a distance. Usually the creature would be seen outside by a person who was inside. Although most of these are not all that interesting to talk about individually, it did reach the point where nearly every person related to us had seen one of these dog-headed man-beasts at least once. We had some cousins staying with us one year in the late 80s, around Halloween appropriately. One of them, the oldest brother I'll call Sam, told all of us that he saw a Dogman inside the house, up on the 2nd floor. He was really upset, so if he hadn't actually seen a Dogman, then something else had driven this guy over the edge. We were all downstairs and heard him screaming up on the 2nd floor before he came loudly barreling down the stairs. It was the freakiest thing. He was screaming as though someone were attacking him, but when we asked him what happened, he could barely even breathe, let alone speak. The story we eventually got out of him was that he climbed the stairs and then entered the hallway that all our bedrooms are in. He saw a huge gray wolf standing upright on its hind legs, come walking down the hallway at him. He told us he began begging the monster not to eat him, when suddenly the beast made a left turn and walked right through the wall into what would have been my sister's bedroom. Needless to say, we all went upstairs and searched the place, not finding anything even vaguely like a werewolf up there. My sister traded rooms with me after that, because I kinda liked the idea of sleeping in the path of the paranormal Dogman, at least back then. Also, I kinda thought that Sam had an overactive imagination. My mother saw the beast on 2 occasions, and she claimed that both times it was slightly translucent. That is, she could sort of see through it, as though it were Casper the Unfriendly Ghost. One time she and my father both claimed to have seen it walk out from behind some bushes, and then dart behind a different bit of foliage. The trouble was, that while it was in their full view, the creature did not appear to have any legs at all. That is to say, the legs might have been invisible. They saw the top half of the beast walking as though he had legs. They just couldn't see those legs, that's all. The most recent sighting, as I said, happened around 5 years ago. We were getting a delivery one winter evening. A package delivery man was walking from his truck, parked in front of the house, around toward our front door. The wind was blowing hard enough that I remembered whistling, and it was not a night to be out in. I went to the front door to receive the box, and was quite surprised to see the man hurl that box to his right instead of delivering it to me on his left. Once he had thrown the cardboard box, I saw why. A very large Dogman was standing right there in the swirling snow. The delivery guy was already running back to his truck to make an escape, and had never even noticed that cardboard box passed right through that Dogman. And when it did so, the bipedal beast evaporated like so much smoke in the air. I stared at that box, lying on the snow and getting wet, where the Dogman had been just a moment earlier. The delivery truck drove away, leaving me in that box alone in the dark, snowy night. Well, I went down there and I tiptoed silently over to that box. I reached down to grab it, just as the wind whipped and whistled and scared the living daylights out of me. I didn't care if it was icy out. I got myself in that box back inside in record time. So, sometimes you can see through it. Sometimes its legs are invisible. One time someone threw something right through it. I saw it fade out. My cousin saw it walk into a wall as though there were a door there. Is this Dogman a ghost? Is it a being from a parallel reality? Can it see us? Do we fade out in its view, the way it fades out in ours? Or is it a residual haunting? Just a replay stored in the location itself that plays over and over and over, like an old VHS machine set on some kind of supernatural timer? Since I can't explain to you what a Dogman is, I most certainly can't explain what a paranormal Dogman is either. So I can't predict if it's coming back. Because I was the last to see it, I believe most strongly that it will likely return. I mean, I hope I'm wrong and my family is right, but I live every day knowing that at any moment, one of us might see that creepy critter once again. And that's because I still think that to this very day, we are haunted by a paranormal Dogman. If you're looking for an EP who's got a bit of swagger, then look no further than today's Patricia Taggart. Please join me in welcoming Patricia Taggart to our channel membership club. Patricia's kind donations help keep our world spinning, and we couldn't be talking to you right now if it weren't for cool people like her. Dogman at sunset. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have 2 main questions about the Dogman, now that I've seen one myself with my own 2 eyes. 1. Why is he so much more likely to be seen at sunset? And 2. Why is he more likely to be seen by people who will be passing on soon after their sighting? The first question might seem easier to answer than it actually is. While I bet you weren't even aware of the situation behind the second question. Most Dogman sightings that we get to hear of were experienced by people who went on to live long lives, so there are very few who are even privy to the fact that so many witnesses have passed on within hours, days, or weeks of laying eyes on a Dogman. My wife has volunteered for over 12 years for a nursing home in northern Wisconsin, and she is often around people who are going to be leaving this world soon. There are so many Dogman sightings by those about to cross over in that facility that she says some of them automatically begin to accept that they're about to transition to the next life almost immediately upon seeing the strange cryptid outside their window. She told me that she's spent hours telling people who saw the Dogman that they weren't gonna die. I asked her if she was ever right about that, and she made a face. "Nobody lives forever," was the best reply she could give me. I've heard all the logical arguments, and so has my wife. The chances of older people dying for any reason is generally greater than in younger people, and the nursing home is filled with older people. Since most of the good folk in there grew up locally, a decent percentage of them are likely to be familiar with the Dogman legend. However, I've never personally heard of the Dogman as a harbinger of doom until my wife started bringing home these stories from the old age home, or whatever fancy name they call it. I won't even go to that place. The idea of staying with people from my own generation all the time sounds too much like going back to grade school. I'd rather visit family and chat with the neighbors. I'm glad we live in a place with friendly people all around us, and I hope I can stay on the outside. To be honest, I'm one of those people who would rather go quick. Some people enjoy things you can do in bed, but the only things I like are physical. I like running. I like boxing. I like dancing with my wife. I like some things we can do in bed, but for the most part, I want to remain on my feet until I'm under the ground. It's fine with me if you disagree, but I would trade 30 years for a quick passing. If there's anyone out there who wants to buy my final 30 sick years away, just leave a comment below. Seriously though, I have a feeling that our Wisconsin werewolf is gonna see to it that I have a speedy transition. My wife told me about a Mrs. A, who she found staring out her window down onto the lawn next to that building. When asked what she was seeing out there, the lady began laughing and said it was a man in a teddy bear suit. My wife humored the senior citizen and acted like that would be a normal thing to see. Another volunteer came into the room behind my wife and looked out that window, screeching in shock. The volunteer screamed that she had just seen the Wisconsin werewolf. By the time my wife looked, she was unable to see anything out of the ordinary down below, and the volunteer had to admit that her shriek had affected the sensitive ears of that upright canine. It ran off, away from the building, and was already long gone from the scene. The old lady asked if it had a long snout and dark fur, and the woman said yes. The patient then asked if it was the size of a tall man, but covered in fur, and the volunteer again said yes, that was a good description of what she saw. So then the nursing home patient informed everyone, that was not the Wisconsin werewolf, that was a man in a teddy bear costume. She went back to laughing, but the Dogman had the last laugh. That patient passed on in her sleep that night. By noon the next day, when that woman volunteer had not appeared for her usual shift, it was discovered that both of the witnesses of the Dogman had passed away before the following sunrise. I mean, the patient was in her 80s, but the volunteer was only in her 60s. It freaked people out, and the concept of the Dogman being a harbinger of doom, like the West Virginia Mothman is sometimes said to be, came into local vogue. Very local vogue, as in the people who lived in or worked at that facility. Having been the only person in that room who did not look out the window to see the Dogman, my wife was also the only survivor. This made her part of the new legend, and as it grew, so her legend grew along with it. People would ask her advice about when it was safe to look out the window, or when you might risk seeing the Dogman and ending your own days. Initially, she was skeptical, but it just kept happening, over and over, until she noticed that it seemed to have something to do with sundown. When people saw the Dogman around sundown, they usually meant they were gonna go soon. She told me she never looked out of any of the windows of that hospice or whatever the thing is they call it. Not at sundown, not at lunchtime, not at any time. My wife has become more superstitious about the Dogman than any of the patients. Why? Okay. Frenchman Mr. B was recovering from a long illness he had not been expected to recover from. He started to regain strength, but was unable to sit up on his own for a long while. He kept begging to be able to go outside, and he kept being told when he could sit up under his own power for a good length of time comfortably, then he would be rewarded with an outdoor lunch in his wheelchair. So Mr. B worked hard and did everything his physical therapist gave him to do, until the day came when Mr. B was wheeled out to the back by the woods to enjoy lunch with his granddaughter, who had driven in for the event. The staff applauded, people took pictures, and some food was served to the couple, who were left alone to have some privacy. No sooner had the crowd walked away from Mr. B and his granddaughter than the old man let out a weak but horrified shout, pointing to the woods past his granddaughter and past the lawn. The old Cajun shouted, "Lougarou! Lougarou!" then stood up out of his wheelchair, pointing. The staff ran toward him, but nobody was able to catch the man before his legs collapsed underneath him, and he fell to the grass in obvious pain and discomfort. Nobody present at this event thought to look where the old man was pointing. Nobody cared what he had to say. They just cared about his health. They assumed he was speaking gibberish. That's why nobody looked to where he was pointing. The day that people stop looking where I point is the day when I want to box myself up and send myself back to the manufacturer. When you know that no matter what you say, you're going to be silenced and ignored, you have to realize that's not even a description of life. That's a description of Twitter. And I quit Twitter years ago. If I start getting shadow banned IRL by the other people in the room, then I'm like milk after its expiration date. To me, that's even scarier than the Dogman parts of my wife's stories, you know? At any rate, the old French guy's health regressed after his great shock, and I don't think he ever got to eat his lunch outside ever again. There are a few more stories like this, and in each case, it's like clockwork that the witness passes on, within 2 weeks, sometimes 3, but often the same night. My wife has come close to seeing the legendary Dogman on multiple occasions, but in each case, she just barely missed doing so. Earlier on, it was just a case of good luck. In more recent times, though, she literally covers her eyes and runs away when someone in that nursing home claims to be seeing a werewolf outside, or inside for that matter. I don't know the actual numbers, but it seems to me anecdotally from the stories she repeats to me that 1/3 to 1/2 of the deaths in that facility are in one way or another Dogman related. That's not to say the Dogman ever touched those people, except perhaps mentally. It's truly shocking how many of the patients they've lost over a decade now saw that Dogman at sunset before they moved on to the next part of their journey. So, the reason I'm writing this is that I saw the Dogman when I was driving last night, and I've not been able to sleep since then. I have to write this all down, just as I have to get my lawyer to change a few small things in my will as soon as I can. I don't really know how long I have. I mean, I did not see the beast through the window of that old people's storage facility, so maybe I'm fine. But it doesn't seem worth taking the risk. I want to prepare for the worst and hope for God or fate to have been looking the other way when this happened. So I was driving west on Spider Lake Road. I just passed Little Spider Lake, and I was driving along the southern shore of Spider Lake, heading in the direction of West Spider Lake. Okay, there's a little pier there. It looks as though they were in the process of building that pier when the Street View camera came through, but I think I saw it completed in the satellite overhead view. At any rate, I saw something coming from the area of that wooden dock there, and it was walking on up to the road. I barely had time to swerve to my left and slam on the brakes. I very nearly drove up on the lawn of the family who lives there, but was able to arrest my momentum in time to avoid that. Once I had stopped the car, and my heart was beating fast, apparently I had maneuvered in the path of the great hairy beast, as it simply leaped on top of the roof of my vehicle and scrambled overhead, landing with a thud to my left and continuing to walk upright on two legs in the most casual manner you can imagine a large canine bopping along to. He walked up past the house like he was the landlord, then kept going out of my view. I saw no humans about. I don't know if there were any other witnesses to what I saw. It was a werewolf-type Dogman. It had a dog head and dog legs, but was very humanoid in other ways as well. It was sort of brownish and sort of grayish or black, but it had features somewhat different from the way you usually show them on your channel. I mean, I guess the snout and ears were like that gray Dogman that you show, but somehow it was all very different as well. It was a sunset sighting, which should surprise nobody. I have not told my wife yet, and I'm not sure I should. I mean, if she becomes convinced that I haven't got long to live, then I'll probably start to feel the same way as her. I'm writing this to you anonymously to get it out of my system, but I think I'll only let my wife know all this after I'm gone by leaving a printout of this email to her in my will. I suppose it remains to be seen if this encounter will turn out to be trivial, or if it will indeed end my life permanently. I've been living in a state of panic since last night, when I saw Dogman at sunset. Look who's back. It's Mr. James Tucker, our executive producer and a guitar plucker. Please join me in welcoming back James Tucker to our channel memberships. Did you know that YouTube ad revenue is down drastically and creators are jumping out windows left and right? It's true. Why, the only reason we're even still here is because of the kind generosity of people like James Tucker. Because of him, we're bringing back PQ River in October for some Halloween scares, and James gets cool perks in return for his kindness. Dogman can camouflage in autumn. Dear Scary Stories NYC. Yo, Scary Dogman Stories, a long-time listener, first-time writerer, or however you say it. Listen, I used to see Dogman all the time where I live in PA, straight up until around 2013 or 2014 maybe, and then it all stopped. I used to sort of be an expert about the Pennsylvania Dogman, or at least I thought so. These days I don't even know if Dogman still lives here in the state or not. Either he has changed his migratory pattern drastically, or he is gone. One or the other. But for a long time, I seemed to be getting good at predicting what was going to happen next with those creatures. And then, like I said, they stopped coming around. It took me half a year before I accepted that it was for real, and I have not heard of another sighting in my locality since then either. Between Shermansdale to the north and Schlosser or Middlesex to the south, there's a hilly, less populated natural area set aside as a state game land. This was the general place wherein I and a collection of other people saw the Dogman for years and years. In the beginning, we only made summer sightings, and it was our initial theory that these creatures were only in Pennsylvania in the summertime. We'd see them from later spring until when the leaves started changing colors. And then for years, nobody reported a sighting in any other season. I'd like to give you an example of the kind of sightings in the summer that we would have, before I explain something we discovered that might or might not be useful to someone out there listening to this. So, nearly every sighting of the beast that I heard of anyone claiming in the early days involved the creature either hunting, scavenging, eating, or carrying food off somewhere to eat. In all cases but one, the beast was seen as a carnivore or scavenger, a meat eater. I knew one woman who claimed that she saw the creature eating from a huckleberry bush in the area. I don't actually know what a huckleberry bush would even look like. The internet says they are crunchy blueberries. Well, maybe the Dogman thinks it's an animal then, and thinks he's crunching its bones. My one summer sighting was not too out of the ordinary, in that I saw a dog-headed Bigfoot marching past my tent in the night, carrying some kind of unmoving creature in one of its hands. Maybe it was a squirrel. Maybe it was a bird. I'm not sure, but it wasn't very large. I had been sleeping in my tent, but something woke me up, and then I had insomnia. I sat in front of the tent flap, staring out of the tent at the night. I had it open wide enough for me to see out, but I still sort of felt safe in the darkness inside there. There was a quiet crashing of leaves that drew my attention ahead of me, to the left, and I felt alarmed when I saw a dog's head coming out of the woods at 6 or 7 feet up in the air. Instinctively, I backed up a bit into the tent, not wanting to be seen, as I watched the rest of this creature walk out into my view on its hind legs. Although it was standing like a bear, its posture was less stiff, and it seemed more used to moving bipedally. It marched from my left to my right, and then back behind some foliage, its right arm swinging as it held whatever kind of prey that was. The Dogman was not seeming to be interested in me at all, and it was quickly out of my view. I do remember it as a bipedal German Shepherd, but I know the markings on the fur were not like that at all. It was colored a kind of a gray that seemed to reflect light in a different way from most hair or fur. It seemed to be able to take on the hue of things around it, but only to a limited extent. If you've seen true chameleons like octopi, the color changes they are capable of making are far more sophisticated. But I do think there was some kind of a reflective ability to the fur of the creature I saw. Almost as though the fur had tiny little natural biological mirrors inside each strand, as crazy as I know that sounds. When I first started meeting people from our area who had seen the Dogman, or who had seen a Bigfoot in our region, we only spoke of summer sightings. We had a general idea that the thing either hibernated through cold weather, or else migrated outward, probably to the south. We even wondered if the creature we saw might go south and become what people call the Lugaroo, or the Rougarou down there. All of those theories went out the window, however, when a woman I'm gonna call Myrtle came to us with our first report, which specifically asserted that the creature is some kind of a chameleon in earnest, able to seasonally camouflage itself. According to the witness Myrtle, she was out with her sister in the woods behind their house, staying up late. They weren't planning on camping out there. They just didn't enjoy the company that their parents had invited over, and so they were hiding out in the woods until they could look back and see the lighting change in their family's house. Then they would know it was safe to come back inside. Although it was dark out there was enough lighting from their home and the surrounding backyards of the other homes that they could clearly see everything around them, or so they thought. Bored, they decided to play a driving game even though they weren't moving. It was that one where you have to spy with your little eye something that starts with an A, then something that starts with a B, and so forth. Like the sisters said she spied Alpha Centauri, and Mert let her get away with it because she didn't know her constellations very well. When Myrtle looked all around, squinting in the darkness to find something that started with a B, she was not very successful. In fact, she was thinking about cheating and saying she saw blackness, but Myrtle's not very good at cheating, so she just scrutinized her surroundings even more. And that was when she saw it. There was something which she had looked at probably 3 or 4 times without paying much attention to, before she thought she saw a part of it move. It had seemed to be part of a tree, but then it looked different somehow. Had it changed? Or had she been mistaken the first time she saw it? Studying the area even more closely, Myrtle saw the branch of the tree move again, and suddenly it looked a lot more like a hairy caveman arm than a wooden branch. Overwhelmed with fear, Myrtle let out a little squeal, which frightened her sister and caused her sister to squeal even more loudly. Then that tree, off in the distance, made a sound like it was really unhappy or exasperated, like a heavy, sad sigh. And then it got up and walked away on its hind legs. Only when that tree walked away, they could see it was not a tree. It was a dogman. It was an upright bipedal dogman, and it was carrying something with it as it departed that was apparently about to become its next meal. The thing that Myrtle was most impressed by was that she never thought there was a creature there, until it got up and revealed its full height, then walked away on its hind legs. Once it was moving, she could see it clearly, but when it held still behind the tree trunk, it seemed to become part of that tree. She kept insisting that it was more than just hiding. It was a form of camouflage. It was her testimony that clued us in, that the dogman might be in the area all year round, but it might just be harder to spot in the autumn and the winter. The last sighting we had before the creature went radio silent was of a completely white dogman in a snowstorm. It raises the question, do some dogman have the ability to change color like a chameleon? If so, how? Is this a physical change that happens seasonally, or is it something more? Well, the sighting of the white dogman set a bunch of us off, and we decided to collectively work together to set up game trail cameras and find ourselves some proof that dogman really is a thing in Pennsylvania. We covered a lot of area with our cameras between the lot of us. It's been, I guess, around 8 years since then, and none of us have seen another dogman again in that entire time. None of us have any dogman or Bigfoot images or video either. It's as if the phenomena got up and moved to a place with less video surveillance. We had really expected things to heat up, but instead they seem to have quieted down permanently. We've never seen them again since we learned that Dogman can camouflage in autumn. You know, you might not know this, but some of us big feet consider ourselves gorilla adjacent. Since today is World Gorilla Day, please consider sending a PayPal donation to your old talking gorilla-faced Sasquatch friend Bigfoot, aka moi. I promise I won't share it with Henry or Peter or anyone. Seriously, in the past month, we've had 3 people have to quit our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's our breakfast fund. We buy our breakfast with that money. And when someone quits, that means a day with no eggs or sausages. If we don't eat something and have some coffee in the morning, we can't do our best work, and then we end up doing things like making World Gorilla Day the executive producer of the show, which makes no sense at all. Wouldn't you rather see your own name up there as executive producer? Well, just go to peterbernard.com and sign up to our PayPal subscribers club. A $7 member there gets all the perks of a $10 YouTube channel member here. Dogman in the basement. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I recently was walking my dog in the park, and a chilly breeze took us both by surprise. A nearby fellow dog walker made a comment to the effect that winter was coming. I got a shiver all over as the stranger's comment brought back some dark memories from my past of the time that the cold weather inspired a dog-headed creature taller than me to stake out our basement as his winter hibernation kill cave. It was years ago now when this happened, and we've moved from that house since then. But I still shake all over whenever I think of that creature that most of you call the Dogman. When I was a kid, I used to get excited with the first 80-degree day of the spring because it meant that summer vacation was coming soon. In the same way, I'd get excited the first day I felt cold without a jacket because that meant Christmas was coming. My mother used to stress out over the coming winter though, because it cost money to heat the house, and because the warmth that she and my father were paying for would attract mice to come in from the cold and live with us. Now that I'm an adult with my own house, we haven't just had a mouse or two sneak inside. We've had our basement broken into by the North American upright walking canid. I want to say, even before I get into the details about the cryptid creature itself, that my wife, who I'll call Zelda, and I were not fans of real-life monster shows when this happened to us. In fact, we only learned that all this was a thing as the problem was already being cleaned up, hopefully for good. If we had known then what we know now, I think we would have handled things differently, including collecting samples of the animal's shed hair, as well as inviting both mainstream and alternative scientists and researchers to have a look at the situation before we had the work done to protect our home from being attacked again in this manner. Now, when this happened, we were living in Kentucky, which is where we're both originally from, and where we both hope to retire to, if retirement ever actually becomes possible for either one of us. It cost almost half as much to redo our basement as it had cost to buy the house in the first place, but I don't think it got us very much more for the place when we sold it. I mean, you can tell the buyer that you shored up the walls and floor of the basement with layers of steel in between layers of concrete, but they'll only ask you why you did that. If you then explain that you went through all that trouble to prevent 7-foot-tall canine-headed feral man-eating monster men from breaking into the basement from below, then the buyer is probably going to have already left before you even finish that sentence. So it was a necessary expense, but we had to sort of downplay it in order to sell the house at all. No doubt about it, the Dogman cost us a lot of money. Now let me tell you what he did that screwed our lives up. So this would have been in the mid to late 2000s, somewhere between 2004 in 2009. It was a cold winter near us. That's all I remember. Zelda and I had the same jobs, same friends, same VHS store that we rented from, which became a DVD store, and same Chinese food restaurant near us during those years. And most days were indistinguishable from most others when I think back on that time. We were very content, but nothing ever happened. We were just so happy to watch every obscure movie in the video store and to read fanzines and websites about what other obscure movies we should search out that we just sort of entertained ourselves all the time. It was a period of abundance for us, and we sort of went to blissful sleep for a long time there. Then, along came the Dogman to wake us up. I guess I mean that literally. The first time we noticed the presence of the Beastman was when it woke my wife, Zelda, up. She then woke me up and said there was something thumping around in the basement. She woke me in the middle of a dream, and I was a little disoriented. I grabbed my Louisville Slugger, and I went to head downstairs to deal with the situation when Zelda insisted I call the police instead. I did as she asked, but when they asked me what the problem was, I had to put my wife on the phone since I didn't really know. The cops are the ones who woke me up the next time when they rang our doorbell like it was a pinball machine. I let them in, and they investigated the basement. I was pretty certain that they'd find a neighbor's cat that snuck in, or something like that. But instead they called me and Zelda down to the cellar to show us something. What they showed us was a hole in one corner of the room. Since that hole was partially on the wall and partially on the floor, both of which were made of stone and concrete, this was obviously concerning to us. The cops told us that the entire neighborhood was built over a cave system, and that sometimes animals can gnaw their way up into people's homes from those caves. I got a calling card for a relative of one of the officers who happened to specialize in this type of basement repair. I must say that was quite convenient. Since this cop seemed to have seen this sort of thing before, I took him aside and asked him what he thought had snuck through that hole. It wasn't even large enough for me to stick my head through, so I was visualizing a rat or a cat. The officer chuckled and said a rat could fit through a hole the size of a quarter, while a skinny cat who was motivated enough could squeeze through cracks so small that your eyes wouldn't believe it. With a hole the size of the one in our basement, the officer explained, we could actually get animals large enough to pose a danger to myself and my wife coming up through the tunnels that I now understood were everywhere, beneath our feet. And with only a little bit more widening, that hole there could probably allow burglars to slip up inside as well. Zelda and I had been convinced. We either needed to find the money to shore up that basement floor, or we needed to move out of there. So, we contacted the relative of the cop. He came out to give us an estimate on fixing our basement. My wife unfortunately was upstairs when this next thing happened and did not see it. But the construction guy and I went down to the basement, turned a corner, and there, its eyes glowing in the darkness, was a man taller than either one of us, covered in fur instead of clothing, legs and head like a canine, on an upright bipedal body that in most ways struck me as humanoid, not animal. The creature was growling at us before I even laid eyes on it, and I remember saying something like, "Whoa," and backing off, my hands held palm outward as I took a few steps backward. The worker guy stayed perfectly still, and I figured I'd better copy him. He seemed to have seen something like this monster somewhere before. Maybe there are more Dogmen underneath Kentucky than most of us really know. Maybe Linda Godfrey needs to move out there for a year or two and see what she comes up with. In either case, I know they're there because I saw it with my own two non-glowing eyes. I would like to hit the pause button on the action for a second. to point out or underline that we were dealing with a real physical animal. Sometimes people have told me that I must have encountered an archetype or something paranormal. And they use all these words that I don't know if I want to learn the meanings of. If other people say that they've seen dogmen who turned out to be ghosts, or turned out to be space aliens, or demons, or devils, or hallucinations, or holograms, or projections, or psychic experiences, then I say more power to them. But in the same sense, I would hope that my feelings could be respected when I insist to you that what we encountered in that basement was an animal of some sort, a physical animal that maneuvered itself through a crack into our basement. It did not teleport there, and it did not vanish in a puff of smoke either. It was real, and physical, and alive. It took up space, it breathed air, and was covered in fur, which it shed all over everything. The creature was making this face that one of my old dogs used to make when he was upset, but too scared to do anything about it. He was baring his teeth and making little moaning sounds in between growling, but sometimes I would notice its glowing eyes seemed to be looking up or to the side. Even in the midst of this terrifying display that made my knees shake and wobble, I could see with my own eyes that the dog was actually frightened about the idea of having to engage in battle with us. He was blustering, but he was hoping we would go away. Even though I knew for a fact that I was right about this, I held perfectly still. Both of us humans did. Even if that big dogman was afraid that we might be able to take it, I don't think either of us felt such a fantasy was realistic. The dogman barked loudly, which made me want to cut and run. The worker guy grabbed me and held me in place. My wife came halfway down the stairs asking whose dog was in the basement, but she stopped when the basement man waved at her to be quiet. I watched as the dogman retreated and wiggled through the tiny hole back into the tunnel system below. It took maybe 3 or 4 seconds, like sucking some spaghetti into your mouth. I don't know if the creature displaced bones or what, but that dogman was taller than I was, and yet somehow fit itself through that hole that I could not fit my own skull through. I watched it happen, but it was so fast that I can't even tell you what I watched. All I know is I had that worker guy bring people out and start work immediately that very evening. They had to tear away part of the floor in order to put it back in a reinforced manner. When they did so, we could see in 5 directions down different twisting natural tunnels, all of which seemed to be leading to our basement. That's an exaggeration, but it's also basically true. We had a lot of expensive work to get done before I would begin to feel safe being inside that home again, but we somehow found a way to make it all happen. When Zelda's job forced us to move just before the pandemic, at least one of our other neighbors had also had to have their basement redone. Still, our dream is that we can somehow afford to retire and move back to that area, preferably back to that very house, if fate allows. I mean, after all that expensive work we had done, at least we know we'd never have to worry about the dogman in the basement. What makes us happy, both me and Hank, is when a nice person leaves a super thanks. In this case, I'm referring to this episode's executive producer, Tabitha Kennedy. Super thanks is sort of like super chat for those of us who are too animated to do many live streams. With the latest weirdnesses of the economy and the YouTube ad revenue, we literally would already be off the air if we were not rescued from oblivion time and time again by the kindness of people like Tabitha Kennedy. Dogman at a Michigan airport. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I used to drive my dirt bike on a dirt road alongside the runways that planes take off and land from. at the Chippewa County International Airport. It can be terrifying to be that close to those huge flying crates, whether they're taking off or slamming on down. But I once encountered something far scarier than that while on that dirt road. I got myself a good long eyeful of the Michigan Dogman. When I was a young man, a junior and senior in high school, I used to ride my dirt bike around over by the airport. There was a recreation center there, actually I'm sure it's still there, called the Pine Bowl Pathway. We started riding around over there, but on the day in question, I was actually coming from the direction of Michigan Route 129, biking from a longer distance away. If you make the right turns, you eventually find yourself on a dirt pathway that eventually runs through the forest right up along the edge of the airplane runways themselves. You can feel the wind they generate almost lift you off the road sometimes, or shove you off other times. It's unlike anything else I've personally experienced, and since we didn't have the internet yet when I was that age, we were all pretty desperate for exciting things to do. Most of the planes using the airport back then were small aircraft, but already in those days there were some commercial flights. Those usually generated the most wind and were the most treacherous to drive alongside of. They could make the trees shake and drop branches all around you. It could have gone wrong in so many ways. I heard that they don't allow bikes in there anymore, and I can't say I would blame them if that rumor turned out to be true. When I was that age, though, it was my job to test myself to see how brave I could be. And I found I was brave enough to ride my dirt bike alongside a plane, landing, or taking off. When fate upped the ante and I found myself riding along with an upright Dogman, then I found I had surpassed my own bravery limit. So exactly how did that happen? Why, thank you for asking, because I was about to go into some detail about just precisely that. It was the early 1990s. Neither of my parents had cell phones, so I didn't either. Actually, I only knew one kid whose parents bought him one of them. They weren't smartphones yet, and they didn't do as many things as phones do nowadays. My parents had a computer that I was allowed to use sometimes for school, but I don't think we had the internet until like 1995 or 1996, if I'm remembering that correctly. I literally had nothing to do most days other than homework, which I tried to avoid as much as possible. So I would ride my dirt bike around. In that area by the airport, there is a lot of dirt. On the other side from where I would usually hang out, there was a fairground. I really enjoyed being in places where people went to have fun, and I've had a number of jobs in both entertainment and recreation fields since I grew up. As long as working people still get some time to kick back and have fun, then all is not lost yet. This interest of mine led me all around the country, and even sometimes to other countries. Nowadays, though, I find myself thinking back on my youth in the Midwest, home of the Dogman. So, one of the things about the Dogman close encounter that I had that sticks out in my memory is that it had been raining on and off for a couple or 3 days, and there were places on these dirt roads where it could get slippery. I had stopped by the side of the road earlier and accidentally put my foot down in a puddle, getting mud all over the bottom half of that shoe. For this reason, I really didn't want to veer at all from the road on that day. Normally I might take a break on a lawn or under a tree, but this was just too wet a day for any of that. So I forget why, but I was riding my bike up toward the airport proper that day, on that dirt road alongside the runways. Maybe I was heading toward the fairgrounds on the other side, or maybe I was just pedaling for the sake of having something to do. While I was doing so, unable to get up to my normal rate of speed due to the wetness of the road, I sensed a plane coming in from my back and my left. I slowed down even further, as I wasn't sure how bad the wind was going to be on that day, and I was hoping I wouldn't get sprayed with dirty water from the puddles all around me. From the sound of this plane, it was a fairly large jet. I decided to stop the bike and turn around to watch the plane approach the runway and land. It was still high enough in the sky that I could see it above some trees and through the branches of some others as it lowered itself and got ready to land. I always found both the takeoffs and landings very exciting. You see, I had seen film of a crash once, and just knowing that could happen made plane watching more nerve-wracking than any TV show or movie. So as I was looking back and seeing the jet coming in for a landing, my heart was already starting to beat a little harder and louder. And when I noticed the strange humanoid figure in the distance, staring at the plane, but running toward me, my heart started beating like a drummer in a speed metal band. I wanted to race away, but I wanted even more to see better what that was. Although it was later in the afternoon on a gray day, I could make out more detail with every lunging step the creature or man took. If this was a human, it must be an insane one. And if this was an animal, well then I must be the insane one. It really looked to me as though there were a hairy Bigfoot running toward me. Only he had a head and hind legs that looked like a dog. He wasn't running like a dog though. He was running like a Bigfoot. I mean, like a man, on two legs. I thought about walking off the side of the road down the incline and giving the beast man room to pass me. I had really not enjoyed stepping in wet mud earlier though, so I decided to move forward. I figured I would try to outrace the dog-headed fur-covered man. After all, he looked like he weighed 400-500 pounds. How fast could he possibly run? Certainly not as fast as my dirt bike. Well, I was having some trouble with slipperiness on that dirt road, but the creature man behind me seemed to have no trouble accelerating at all. He must have had some long and sturdy claws on those feet, which allowed him to grip the road better than my wheels were managing. Each time I looked behind, he seemed to have gotten a little bit closer to me. I could see him in my mirror, and I have to say, this thing's legs looked more muscular than a horse's legs. They ended in huge dog paws, not hooves, but this monstrosity was clearly built for speed. Whatever it was. I mean, let's face it, we're talking about a Dogman here. It's just that, even after having this experience, I don't really know what a Dogman is, or what that creature was. I am certain, however, that he was not an ordinary wolf who taught himself to run upright. He was attaining terrifying speeds on muddied ground, and it was undeniable that this was a beast or man who was born to run upright and in no other manner. So I was pretty out of breath from pedaling so hard and maneuvering around puddles. I had put all that effort into avoiding the Dogman, and then very suddenly, he caught up to me and was running directly to my left. I was looking at him, but he was looking up in the sky at the landing jet. It was booming through the air immediately to his left. I tried to move to my right. I tried to give the Dogman more room to run past me, but I was so overwhelmed by what was happening that I sort of glitched out. Or, my nervous system did. In the language of those days, I choked under pressure. I did the thing where you zig when you should have zagged, and I plowed myself and my dirt bike straight into a puddle half the size of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm exaggerating. Slightly. But not by much. As nasty as it was to stand there feeling the water seeping into my shoes, I waited until the Dogman had run completely out of my sight before I started getting myself and my bike out of the blech. So the last time I saw that Dogman, he was running after the landing airplane. which means he was running toward the main airport terminal. He was at least as tall as a basketball player, but had legs on him so muscular that it looked like he could carry an army tank on his back and not slow himself down. If he had made it into the terminal, there would have been pandemonium and chaos. That's why I assume he called off his pursuit of the plane long before he got to the baggage carousel. I'm betting the Dogman was surprised to see how large that bird was once it came all the way down to the earth. None of my friends or I ever saw anything like the Dogman in that area ever again. In fact, other than this one night I might have seen a UFO in the night sky, I've never had anything strange happen to me ever again at all. This was the only cryptid I've ever been close to, so let me go over in my mind everything I remember about it, and then I'll close this out. First of all, I do not remember any odor as it ran past me. I get asked if it smelled like rotten eggs or anything, but I think that's supposed to be Bigfoot, who gets all eggy. Between how hard I was pedaling and how scared I was, I'm thinking I was probably sweating and stinking more than that old Dogman. When it ran past, it was facing away from me to watch the plane. So I saw its massive Batman shoulders and Rocky Balboa arms that ended in these clawed Wolverine hands. He was like a wild, natural Justice League, all rolled into one hideous and horrifying form. It really was as muscular as anything from any comic book. I've had people ask me if I think that Dogman can project an unnatural fear agent that makes people scared. I'm gonna tell you something. If you ever ride your bike past one of these creature men, you'll understand on a visceral gut level that there is nothing unnatural about being afraid of a Dogman. I mean, let's take stock here. Big as a man or larger? Right. Legs so strong they could probably run the speed limit while carrying a school bus, right? Yes, sir. Larger than normal wolf head that could easily snap your neck in one chomp, right? Yup. Note that I haven't even gotten around to mentioning the stuff that's just plain spooky and unnerving about the Dogman. I mean, its eyes were glowing, but it really was not that dark out. Why and how was that happening? How could this perfect specimen of Dogman just be randomly chasing an airplane on a random evening down a random muddy dirt road alongside a random airport? If these beastmen exist so close to humanity, then why aren't they on the evening news? Why aren't they in the zoo? Why aren't they at least in documentaries on PBS? I mean, if this hadn't happened to me personally, I would be saying that the witness was either out of his head crazy, or else he was lying. There's no way that I could have seen what I said I saw, except I was there, and I did see what I said I saw. And in this case, that would mean I saw a Dogman chasing an airplane at the Chippewa County International Airport. Johnny says, CS, come on down. She turns all our frowns upside down. That's why she takes the thank you crown. CS is the most uncommon noun. Please join us in thanking CS for making a very generous donation to our breakfast fund here at Scary Stories NYC. YouTube advertising revenue has dropped so hard and far for small channels like us that we would literally be unable to continue if there weren't kind, saintly individuals like CS going to our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page and sending us food money so that our pet human can have some coffee before he writes these stories down. You know, he makes no sense until he's had some caffeine, and that stuff costs more every month, it seems. So, if using PayPal is against your religion, we also have the handy dandy thanks button under each of these videos right here on YouTube. We have lots of ways for you to become part of the channel's culture and to get cool perks too. Here to explain it all is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.